As you may or may not know, I have tons and tons of favorite sayings, so I don't have just one. And one of those sayings is 9 women can't make a baby in a month. Now, when people first hear that, a lot of times they'll kind of like chuckle, like, what does that mean? And it really means what it says. Sometimes you'll have an issue where you can throw more money at it, or you can throw more resources at it, and you can make something happen a little bit faster. A baby's not like that. It doesn't matter. It's going to take 9 months to have a baby. You can't say, well, I want a baby faster. I'm going to have 3 women work on that and have the baby in 3 months. It's going to take 9 months. That's just the way it is. So, of course, what in the world does that have to do with running? Well, unfortunately, many times during your training, you may have some breaks in your training. Those breaks could be due to injury. Those breaks could be due to sickness, and sickness is a very common one this time of year when a lot of people are getting sick. Or they could be planned breaks because you've got a trip coming up. But generally speaking, trips are planned into the training and they're really not going to cause any impact because they're planned breaks. It's those unplanned ones when you're out for injury or you're out because you're sick that all of a sudden there's an implication from training. And what happens then is people get back to training and say, well, I've got to get going. I've got to train harder. I'm behind. I've got to catch up. But what you need to remember is 9 women can't make a baby in a month. Is there going to be an impact to your training? Yeah, probably, because that break wasn't supposed to be there and it happened. But the only thing you can really do about that is get back into it and train smart, because you certainly don't want to be out again because you did something foolish. So what you look at is you say, well, how long was I out and why was I out are the two things that I look at to say, okay, what do we have to do now? So a general rule of thumb, very, very general rule of thumb, is you take how long your break was and you multiply that by 2, and that's how long it'll take you to kind of get back to where you were. So if you're out for a week, within a couple weeks, it's generally business as normal. Certainly many times it could be quicker than that. If you're out for 3 weeks, it might take 6 weeks to get back to where you were before. Again, nobody likes to hear that. They want to train harder. They want to work harder. 9 women can't make the baby in the month. Very, very general rule of thumb, though. There's certainly all kinds of things to consider. So what I consider is your loss of running mobility is a big thing to consider. So a lot of times when people are out and they get back and it's really slow and they're running too slow, or it might even be run, walk, whatever. Well, gee, why am I doing this? Well, when you're not running, you lose some of that running mobility. Your muscles lose the way that they move when they run. And if you get back into it too quickly, if you try and be too aggressive, you're going to break something, and you don't want to break anything. So I always try and think about, well, what type of loss of mobility did you have? You're out 2 or 3 days, your loss of mobility is probably nothing, again, depending upon why you were out. You're out for 2 months, I'll guarantee you've lost a lot of running mobility in those 2 months, even if you've done some cross training. So we need to kind of ease into that. Another thing that you look at is you look back in your training and you say, did you lose any progressions? So what I mean by that is, most training plans when you're building up towards a race will take either some duration or some intensity or something, and every week it's designed to be just a little bit harder other than some recovery weeks to slowly get your body stronger and stronger. The most common one is, say, looking at long runs if you're training for a marathon, but even any other distance. So the example here I have is, well, maybe you were supposed to do 14 miles, then 16, then 18. Maybe that was your progression for long runs. And maybe you're out 2 weeks, you missed the 14 and the 16. Probably jumping right back in that 18 isn't going to be a good idea. You're probably going to have to step back and say, okay, I'm going to have to do this differently because I missed some of the progressions that were in there. So that's another consideration. Another big consideration is, well, why were you out? And going back to the examples I had before, the most common ones are going to be some type of an injury or that you were sick. And that makes a really big difference. So if you were out for a week because you had the flu, then when you come back, there's a little bit of loss of running mobility. You won't really lose fitness in a week, but you'll feel like you lost some fitness. So you want to get eased back into it, but it's not that big of a deal. On the other hand, let's say that you're out for a week or two because you had a stress reaction. Well, generally going to be a little bit more cautious about that because you had an injury. And the last thing we want is for that injury to come back. So the reason why you were out is going to be a determining factor in, how hard do you want to get back into it? How much time can you gather up? So unplanned breaks, as I said, they really stink. I've had those. You don't want those. You feel like I'm going to lose everything for the race. But what you really need to do is get past and realize it's done. There's not much I can do about that. But I'll tell you, it doesn't suck as much as being out a second time because you did too much, too soon, too fast, and you either re-injured yourself or now caused a new injury. So just be smart about it. And when in doubt, do less.